you will have spoken to a lot of Jamaicans who will say they are Kingstonians. Well, if you are a Kingstonian, you should be born somewhere near the the clock in King Street or in Victoria Park. And I was born in 100 King Street, and where I was born, from my house, you could see the clock, the parish church clock. So I'm a true Kingstonian.
What was it like growing up in Kingston?
Honestly, Zeb, uh, Kingston was a paradise. Jamaica was a paradise when I was growing up, because you will have heard from so many different people about Jamaica then. I mean, when we were going to school, if your parents had to go out and you came home from school and they didn't have time to prepare your dinner, you would never go hungry because your next door neighbor would have seen your parents going out, your mama or whoever, and would say, "Come on over and have dinner with us." You would never go hungry. You have names like Almond Town, but before they were towns, they were called pens. So it used to be Almond Pen, Jones Pen, Trench Pen. But then, to upgrade it, they changed it to towns, like Trench Town and Trench, you know, Greenwich Town. It used to be Greenwich Pen, you know. But like I said, it was a paradise, you know. During my time as growing up as a child, I hardly remember going to a funeral. You didn't hear people only died from old age. You know, people, you never heard of murder. Nobody killed nobody. You know, and if you and I had a disagreement, I'd say, meet me after school, and all the kids would make a ring, and we'd have a good punch up. And after the fight was finished, you and I were friends again. That was it. You cleared your system, no more problems. And you would be my defender, or I would be your defender. On the road again. So there was no grudge. Nobody wanted big gold chains and fancy clothes, Nike sneakers and all that. We were humble kids, and we weren't jealous of each other. Even in the entertainment business, if you were a singer and I was a singer, I wasn't jealous of you. You weren't jealous of me. What you had was yours. What I had was mine. But I would always share it with you, and you would do the same. You share with me. Well, like I said, singing it's a talent. Like you have great tailors, great mechanics. It's not something that was actually learned. It was a gift, because I entered show business at a very early age. I started in show business when I was 7 years old, because I was a contortionist. And the reason why I became a contortionist was a man called Joseph Clemendor, who was a Trinidadian, came to Jamaica with a one-man show. He was a great singer. He was a great acrobat. He did everything. And in his show, he called himself the Cobra Man. And in Jamaica, they say Cobra Man. But I he offered a prize to anyone who could do one of his acts, because in his acts he would bend himself in various different ways, and like a snake. And when I was like 2, 3 years old, I used to do these things without even knowing I was doing it. But I used to scare people by putting my chin on and my two hands on the ground, and I'd bend over and take my 2 feet and play with my ears, or touch my lips, or eat, or anything like that. People used to be scared when they saw this. But when this man came to Jamaica and he was doing this beautiful show, he offered a prize that anyone who could do one of his acts would get £50. Now, at this time, £50 could buy a house. You understand? But so a friend of my dad saw the thing in the paper, and took me, to this guy's place, his hotel, and says, I've come to collect the prize, because this kid will do your acts. So he said, okay. So I got on the table, did one of the acts, and the guy was blown away. He said, which school did he go through, to learn yoga? And I didn't even know what yoga meant. But, I didn't get the money because it was a bluff, because he figured no one else could do it, but I didn't get the money, but he became good friends with my family. So after he left, the island, I became the Cobra boy. And I started, because I was replicating all the acts that he did. And I replicated the show that he did. A lot of the people who were having shows in Jamaica, acquired my services, and I became a star, as a young kid, as the Cobra boy. And I traveled the whole island, doing this act. And the money that I was paid, was really good money then, and being a 7-year-old, I all the money I collected, I just had to give it to my parents. But the thing was that everywhere I was advertised, I was advertised as Cobra Boy, the 70-year-old genius, the Wonder Boy, 70 years old. And even when I was 10, I was still 7 years old, So after this wore out, and being like a 10, 11-year-old, they were having singing competitions all over the island. I loved a vocalist called Mario Lanza. I think he was Italian. And I used to sing his songs. And then I fell in love with the voice of Nat King Cole. And I started singing Nat King Cole songs and Sam Cooke, because at that time, we all, aspired to singing, songs that were coming from the United States, because Jamaica really didn't have any recording. There was no recording studio, so you couldn't make a record. So we were doing all these competitions, and most of the guys, like Alton Ellis, Ken Booth, Derek Harriott. Derek had a group called the Jiving Juniors, and he entered these competitions. You had a guy called what was his name? Veer Johns. Veer Johns was the guy who had all these concerts and these singing competitions. And the thing about it was, if you could not sing, you could not go to these competitions. If you went to the competition and you sang, before you get into the theater where these shows are kept, you would see people standing outside with brown paper bags, and in it they had rotten eggs and rotten apples and anything. So when you got on stage and you started singing, if you could sing, they stone you. But then, I was singing in church. I went to one of the greatest schools in Jamaica, St. Aloysius Boys School. It was a Catholic school, and it was affiliated with Alpha because it was a Catholic school. And I used to sing in the choir in Cathedral, the boys' choir. But I got chucked out by the priest then, because this priest was called Father Bulroy Campbell, and he used to be a boxer, so you don't argue with this guy, But what used to happen is that every Thursday we used to go to choir practice in the church, and being a rebel, before you start singing, you have to do a prayer. They spoke in Latin, and the prayer says you had to hit your chest. And the prayer said, mea culpa, me maximi culpa. But being a rebel, I said, mea cowboy, mea Mexican cowboy. And the priest got me, man. I just felt his hand grab me in my hair and pulled me out. And when I looked around, it was Father Campbell. And he said, Francis, get out of my class and never come back. Until, I was like 16. And at that time, a lot of guys were recording. One of the masters of the trade at that time was Derek Morgan. And a friend of mine called Casper Campbell, invited me to go to the recording studio. But when I told my mom I was going, she said, "No, you ain't going into town to no recording studio." And then, I had some friends who everybody was into singing then in groups. So we started a group called the Sheridons. And when I started the Sheridons, we started getting invited to parties to sing at parties and all that, and our group became very, very good. A competition came up at the Carib Theater with a show. But the competition was called A Star Is Born. And we decided to enter this competition. And when we did, it was fierce, but the group, really stood out, really, really stood out. And I remember we used to rehearse in sometimes in my backyard, sometimes at the front of the house, and we used to walk on the streets and rehearse and sing, and I remember the first leg of the competition we did at Carib. We had a tenor, and this tenor, his name was Alan. We used to call him Wattle, but Alan wasn't really he sang, but he didn't have the best of voice. And we had one of the best bass singers in Jamaica. We called him Brummel, but his name was Edwin Brown. So we called him Edwin Brummel Brown. And then we had a tenor who was Owen Roberts, but we called him Spirit. And Spirit was a great tenor. And the next leg of the competition was coming up, and we won the third leg, the first leg. But the second leg was coming up, and we had to make sure we win this because you had some great groups and great singers in there. So we needed another tenor, and the time was running fast. We couldn't find a tenor until one evening, Edwin came up to. Edwin was staying at my house at that time, and he came in the evening, and he said, "I found me a tenor." He said, "The only problem," he said, "he's got a great voice, but he can't sing harmonies. So we'd have to teach him harmonies." I said, "Yeah, that'd be fine, man." So I said, "Where is he?" And he said, "He's outside." So I went out and saw this kid, and we had a brief chat. And I said, "Could you sing me a song and let me just hear, what your voice is like?" And he sang, and I said, "Yeah, you're great." I said, "Well, what we'll have to do, the next song that we're going to sing on the show is a 12th of Never. That was done first by Johnny Mathis, and it was a ballad song. And we decided, we're going to do this song, the 12th of Never. So I started teaching him harmonies. I said to, "Okay, kid, we'll see you tomorrow. Can you come tomorrow at the same time?" And he said, "Yeah." So everybody left, and we went inside, and I thought that he had gone, but I got ready and was going to look for my girlfriend. And at that time, you had a group by the name of the Gaylets, and the leader of the group, her name was Beryl Lawson. I was going out with her then. So I said to the guys, I said to my mom, "I'm going up to see Beryl, so I see you guys later." And when I went outside, I saw this kid still sitting on the fence. So I said, "I thought you'd gone home, man." And he said, "I ain't got no home." I said, "What? What do you mean he ain't got a home?" He says, "No." I said, "So where do you live?" And he says, "I don't live nowhere. I just hang out, down the Baltimore Walden Park Road by the gully." I said, "You're kidding." So I said, "So where you going to sleep tonight?" He says, "On the side of the gully." Now, the gully is like the place that wastewater runs,
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God. So I went back and I said to my mom, "Mom, this new kid we got to join the group." She said, "Yeah." I said, he just told me that he doesn't live anywhere. He hasn't got a home to live." And she said, "What? So where does he sleep?" And I said, "He sleeps out in the open." And she said, "Wow." So I said, "Can we do something for him? Can we put him up?" And she said, "Well, what you can do if Brahmo, because Brahmo was staying with us then, my bass singer, she said, if Brahmo will let him stay in his room, what I can do, I'll get him a bed tomorrow. And we said, yeah, that would be great. So I went back out and I got him. And at first I said, Brahmo, can this kid stay in your room, for the night? And he said, yeah. So we made up a bed, of blankets and sheets and all this on the floor, right? And that's where he slept that night. And the next day, my mom went out and bought him a single bed. And he lived with us, until we did the competition. That guy that I was telling you about was Pat Kelly. And Pat actually lived in my home for 15 years. So we won the competition. As a matter of fact, we came second in the competition because the organizers of the show said, you guys didn't listen to the name of the show. It was A Star is Born, not A Stars Are Born. He said it's only one ticket because the prize was to go to New York to do the Ed Sullivan show, but it was only one ticket for one guy. They gave it to a guy that used to sing with Alton, Eddie Parkins, and he got the trip to New York, and we became second. But even though we only came second, what was happening is that we had the attention of every band, every club, everywhere in Jamaica. We had their attention, so everybody wanted us to work with them. We decided to take the best, work with the best band in Jamaica at that time, and that was a band called Carlos Malcolm and his Afro-Jamaican Rhythms. And we worked with Carlos for a couple of years until he decided he was going to do some tours of the Caribbean. And when he did the tours of the Caribbean, at the time, Spirit was working with the government as an accountant, so he couldn't just leave his job like that. And the bass singer Brahmo, he had a job also, so he couldn't leave. So I went on tour with Carlos by myself throughout the Caribbean. But after we came back and we did a few more, maybe another year, Carlos decided he was going to take us to Freeport, Grand Bahama. And Spirit, by that time, decided he wanted to take singing seriously. So he quit his job, and so did Brahmo. But Pat couldn't find a birth certificate because he couldn't find, he couldn't get a passport because he couldn't find a birth certificate. And eventually, my mom, got him a birth certificate, but that was like 3 or 4 years later, But we toured with with Carlos, and it was great. It was really, really good because we gained a lot of experience, in singing. But after a while, after a couple of years, the guys, everybody just wanted to get back home. So the guys decided that they were going back home. So when I went back to Jamaica in 1960, I think it was 68, I had a friend called Jackie Estick. And Jackie Estick was, he was a journalist, but he was the one who wrote most of the liner notes for Studio One. And when I went back to Jamaica in 68, because we went to school together, as we went to kindergarten school together and grew up, So he was also a singer. So when I met up with Jackie, I said, "Hey, I hear all these recordings are going on with and some good music is coming out. Who you think is the right studio that I should get in touch with if I want to do a recording?" And he said, "You got to get in touch with Clement Dodd, because Mr. Dodd is the best producer. He's got the best band, best sound, everything." So Jackie hooked me up with Coxsone Dodd. I recorded once at Duke Reed's studio. As a matter of fact, everyone was scared of Duke, because he used to hang around with his gun in his waist, and every now and then he would pop a shot, you know, and people, well, I for one was scared of him, you know, so I didn't want to really go to his studio. Coxsone was a gentleman, you know, and so I love hanging out with Coxsone.
I wanted to ask you about the mellotones.
There's not much I can tell you about the mellotones because uh, let me just run something with you about the way recordings went on in Jamaica. If you popped into a studio or you were standing outside a studio or you're nearby and someone knew Zeb is around the corner and the group was doing a track, they would say, "Hey Zeb, you want to come, you know, and do a few lines with us?" And you would go in, sing a few songs. Maybe your name would never come out on that record, but you know it just happened that you get in there and you do, because to sing on any record was always a honor, you know. So I guess that happened to me a few times with the Mellotones,
Okay.
wherein I was in the studio or I was outside, and they knew I was there, and they say, get Winston to come on and fit in and do a few lines with us.
So you were never a member?
No,
Okay.
never really a member. I was going to school in Miami, and I was home for the weekend, and I was going back. I came in on the Friday, and I was going back on Monday, flying back to Miami, and Bruce Ruffin, who was a very good friend of mine from school. I knew him very well. He was told that I was home, so he came to look for me on the Sunday, and he said, "Winston, I got this track, and I'd love you to do it for me, man, because it would fit you down to the earth. So can you do this track?" And I said, "I'm going back tomorrow." He says, "Tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What time is your flight?" And I said, 3:00. And he says, we got plenty of time, man. And he says, "If you can meet me tomorrow morning at 10:00 at Duke Reed Studio." I said, "I don't like that guy, man." He says, "Don't worry about it, man. Just meet me tomorrow." So I said, "Okay." So I went to the studio the next morning. I was packed and ready to go. I had my suitcase and everything. So got to the studio, and Bruce was there, and he took me into the studio. At that time, there was no cassette. There was no way to play anyone a track. You could only the only tapes that we had was like a 1/4-inch tape, and most of the recording machines then were Revox 1/4-inch tape. And to buy a Revox machine was like buying a house. It cost a lot of money. So he had no facilities to play the rhythm track to me, only in the studio. So, but he gave me the lyrics and he sang it to me a few times. I ran it a few times until I got it, and he said, "Yep, let's go." And I recorded. And the song was a song called "Go Find Yourself a Fool." After I recorded it and I heard it in the studio, I didn't hear it with backing vocals, because it was after I left that Bruce put backing vocals on it with the techniques. And then the record came out as, "Go Find Yourself a Fool" by the Techniques. Never mentioned my name. 1971. I was here in London, and I went into a club called the Roaring Twenties, and at that time you had they had resident DJs, and the resident DJ was a guy that my brother knew, and I heard him playing this record. I said, "I know that record." And then he said, "Yes, people, brand new record by Winston Francis." He said, "It says the Techniques, but it's Winston Francis, leading it. If you listen carefully, you'll hear it's Winston." And he played it 4 times. And I was overwhelmed. I thought, wow. And years later, I recorded an album called Just Once with one of the greatest producers out of Jamaica, Roy Cousins. And while we were putting the album together, Roy suggested that I re-record go find yourself a fool. And he did a fantastic job. At that time, when I recorded it at Dynamic, before that, it was World Records, and it was owned by a guy called Clifford Ray. And the first time, because Clifford Ray knew my dad, they were buddies. And one day, when my dad and Mr. Ray were talking, he said to me, "I hear Winston been doing, some really good works with Carlos band. Why don't you come and make a record with me?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." And he said, "Have you written any songs?" And I said, "Well, I wrote a song called Venus." And he said, "Come on down to the studio and let me hear it." I went down, and you had a great keyboard player called Aubrey Adams. He had a quintet. So I went down and I sung it to Aubrey, and he said, "Wow, this is great." So we recorded it, and that was the first time I recorded in Dynamic Studios. But then it was called World Records.
Is it true that you're going to be 80 this year?
Yep, in May this year. Well, the 25th of this month.
The 25th. Wow. So I never would have guessed.
My doctor said to me, "I'm 62 years old and I look like your father."
Yeah.
He said, "How do you look so young, man?" I said, "Well, I got a good wife. And I exercise, quite a lot. Every morning I get up, go downstairs onto the treadmill. I didn't this morning because I didn't really sleep that well last night, because I was thinking about, you heard of the group, The Chosen Few?
Yes.
Well, one of the members had a heart operation last Wednesday, and he's still unconscious. He hasn't woken up yet. And that we were at the hospital yesterday. So that kind of impact on me last night. So I didn't really sleep that well. But yeah, so I didn't go in the machine this morning, but usually every morning I get up at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, between 6 and 7. I get on the treadmill and I exercise, man. And while I'm exercising, I exercise my voice also. So my doctor, he says, "Are you sure about your age, man?" He said, "Because them people in Jamaica, they didn't keep records that well, did they?" I said, "No, man. I was born in 1943.